The evening train hissed into the small Dakota station as though it carried the last breath of the dying day. Smoke drifted skyward, violet against a lavender dusk, and the rails shimmered faintly with the heat of a long sun. Clara Mayfield sat rigid on the wooden bench, her gloved hands tight around a scuffed satchel that carried all she owned. She looked like a bird blown off course, trembling, feather-light, unsure whether the ground beneath her would keep her or swallow her whole. Her sister had once sat on the same bench. Ruth Mayfield, older by 2 years, with sharper eyes and a will of stone. Clara remembered the morning Ruth had met the rancher who waited beyond the fence line that day, a broad-shouldered man named Elias McGraw. He had stood with hat in hand, the weight of expectation in his posture. Ruth had looked him over, eyes narrowing at the girth beneath his coat, the heavy lines of his face, and she had spoken words Clara wished she could forget. "I will not bind myself to a man like that." Then she had walked away, leaving dust swirling behind her skirts. The town had feasted on the moment. Mrs. Hensley, the butcher's wife, repeated it until it soured on every lip. Rejected like a hog at market. The fat rancher left standing with his pride in tatters. The cruelty spread like burrs catching at cloth, and Elias McGraw became a story told in whispers, not a man of flesh and grief. Clara, youngest, quietest, and least prepared for the world's bite, had been offered as a replacement. Ruth had said it with a shrug. "Better you than me, little dove. I need more from life than cattle and loneliness." Clara had not argued. Poverty pressed too hard against her ribs to allow refusal. Now she stood as the last passengers stepped down, their boots clattering, their voices bright with reunion. Beyond them, he waited. Elias McGraw leaned against the rail, his frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. His coat was worn, hat brim low, calloused hands resting against the wood. He looked older than his years, though not unkind. When his gaze lifted and found hers, Clara felt her breath falter. He tipped his hat, but words did not come easily. "Miss Mayfield," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. She swallowed. "Yes, sir." For a moment, they stood in silence while the world around them thinned. The chatter of families, the clatter of baggage, the whistle's echo fading. He stepped forward, offered his hand, not in possession, but in steadiness, as if he knew her knees might buckle. She placed her trembling palm in his, and together they moved toward the wagon where 2 mules waited with patient eyes. The ride stretched quiet. The leather of the seat creaked beneath them, and the prairie rolled out wide and endless. Grass bent low in the wind, shadows stretching long. Clara stole glances at him, at the lines carved deep into his brow, the strength in his shoulders. He did not look at her, yet she felt his restraint, his effort not to crowd her. Shame pricked her skin, shame for her sister's rejection, for her own fear, for stepping into a place where she was not first choice but second thought. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun had nearly dropped. The house rose solitary against the horizon, 2 stories of weathered boards, windows catching the last light. Fences stretched, broken in places, and cattle grazed in muted clusters. The silence of the land pressed close. He lifted her satchel when they arrived, carried it as if it weighed nothing, and guided her inside. The door groaned on its hinges. The house smelled of dust and smoke, of meals eaten quickly and alone. There was no lace on the windows, no softness to the furniture. A woman's touch had been absent too long. "This room's yours," Elias said, leading her to a small chamber. A bed, plain quilt, washstand. He set her bag down gently. "You'll want rest after the journey." She nodded, unsure if gratitude or fear should rise first in her throat. "Thank you." He lingered at the doorway, hat in his hands, as though he might say more. Then he gave a small nod and left her to the silence. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. The boards creaked beneath her. She listened to his boots recede down the hall, then the muted thud of him moving through the kitchen. Her chest ached with the weight of what had been asked of her. To step into Ruth's shadow, to accept a man already marked by ridicule, to belong where belonging had not been freely offered. Night deepened. Stars pressed their cold faces against the window pane. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams when she heard soft footsteps outside her door. Light hesitant. She held her breath. The door creaked open. A small figure entered, a child in a thin nightdress, bare feet whispering against the floorboards. Hair tumbled loose around her face, eyes wide and glinting in the dark. She clutched a rag doll, one button I'm missing. Clara pushed herself up. "Hello there," she whispered, voice tender without intending it. The girl stepped closer, almost shy. Her voice was small as a reed in the wind. "Can you be Mama?" The words pierced. Clara's throat closed. She looked at the child, 6, maybe 7, and saw loneliness deeper than the house's silence, need sharper than any gossiping tongue. The doll's frayed head rested against Clara's knee as the girl leaned closer, expectant. Clara's hand rose on instinct. She brushed the child's hair back, the strands soft as corn silk. Her palm trembled with the weight of the plea. She wanted to say yes, wanted to promise comfort, but fear pressed hard against her ribs. She had no map for this land, no promise to offer, no certainty that she was enough. So she said nothing. Only her hand lingered, warm against the girl's hair. The child sighed, leaning into the touch as though silence was answer enough. In that moment, Clara felt something shift inside her, an opening, fragile but real, as if the child's question had broken a wall she had not known she carried. Outside, a coyote's cry echoed across the prairie. The house seemed smaller, closer, filled with breath. Clara lay back once the girl crept to her side and curled against her. The doll pressed between them, the child's hand clutching her arm in sleep. Clara stared at the ceiling once more, but her thoughts no longer wandered only to shame or rejection. They tangled now with tenderness, with the terrifying possibility that she might matter. Down the hall, a floorboard groaned. She knew Elias lingered in the dark, listening, aware that the small voice of his daughter had asked the stranger what even he could not. And in that silence, Clara realized the true weight of what she had stepped into. Morning broke with pale light filtering through the curtains Clara had mended the evening before. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the child who had stolen into her bed during the night. Annie's hand still clutched the rag doll, her mouth parted in the soft rhythm of sleep. Clara lingered for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. Something inside her trembled with both fear and tenderness, as though the simple act of being needed was more binding than any vow. In the kitchen, Elias was already at the stove, frying bacon in a blackened pan. The air smelled of salt and smoke. He looked up when she entered, the brim of his hat set aside for once. His eyes softened briefly, though his words were plain. "Coffee's there if you want it." Clara poured herself a cup, hands steady though her heart wasn't. The silence between them was not empty but cautious, like two rivers running side by side, not yet joined. She set a loaf of bread on the table, one she had baked the previous afternoon from flour she found in the pantry. Elias noticed, nodding once. That nod was worth more to her than praise. Days passed in such rhythms. Clara mended curtains, scrubbed the floors, stitched torn shirts. Elias worked the fields, returned late with dust on his coat and weariness in his bones. At night, Annie hovered near Clara, shadowing her movements, slipping her doll into Clara's lap as if it were an offering. Affection was never asked for, only given in gestures too small for words. One evening, the chair at the kitchen table splintered beneath Elias as he sat. He cursed under his breath and moved to the bench instead. Clara fetched tools and began working the next day, hammer awkward in her slim hands. Elias found her struggling and wordlessly knelt beside her. His hands, broad and sure, guided the nails. Their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. In the lamplight, silence grew charged, not heavy with fear, but filled with an unspoken recognition. Both carried wounds, and both were learning to stitch them closed in quiet ways. The first time Clara ventured into town with them, she felt the full weight of other eyes. Mrs. Hensley stood outside the mercantile, arms crossed, lips twisted like barbed wire. Her voice carried far. "So that's the sister, the leftover one. Laughter, quick and sharp, rose from those gathered. Clara's cheeks burned hot. She tried to keep her head high, but her heart thudded in her throat. Elias's hand rested briefly at the small of her back. Steadying her, though, he said nothing. Annie, small and fierce, gripped Clara's hand tightly. "Don't listen," she whispered, her voice trembling but loyal. That tiny defense struck deeper than the insult. Clara felt shame, yes, but also the faint spark of belonging. The gossip followed them like a dust cloud. At church, whispers lingered in pews behind them. At the smithy, men smirked. Clara bore it quietly, though every word cut her thin. In the evenings, she sewed by lamplight, stitching her hurt into fabric, refusing to let her hands stay idle. Elias would sometimes pause in the doorway, watching, but he never asked what pained her. His silence was not ignorance. It was restraint. It was Annie who broke the hardness of the days. One night, storms rolled across the prairie, rain hammering the roof. Clara found the child curled in fear at the window. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around her. Annie pressed her face to Clara's chest and whispered, "I prayed you would come. I prayed for Mama." Tears stung Clara's eyes. She whispered back, "I'm here now." The words left her lips before she could think, and in the saying, she realized they were true. But the town would not let her rest easy. At the Sunday gathering, under the wide roof of the church porch, Mrs. Hensley's tongue sharpened again. "The rejected one and the fat one. Quite the pair," she declared, loud enough for all to hear. Laughter rippled. Clara froze, breath shallow. Faces turned toward her, some pitying, most amused. She could flee, or she could stand. Her knees trembled, but she lifted Annie into her arms. The child clung to her neck, trusting, unashamed. Clara's voice shook but held steady as she answered, "Some rejections are blessings. I was not chosen first, but I was needed most." The word surprised even herself. A hush fell. Elias's gaze burned into her, something fierce and grateful rising behind his eyes. Mrs. Hensley's smirk faltered, her cruelty losing its edge against the quiet strength in Clara's tone. The rest of the service passed in silence. When they returned home, the prairie seemed changed, the air lighter. Elias lingered on the porch with her after Annie had gone to bed. They said little. He simply sat beside her, shoulders broad and steady. The stars stretched endless above them. The silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like safety. Clara held Annie's doll in her lap, thumb tracing its frayed seams. She thought of the girl's plea, of Elias's wordless patience, of her own trembling voice at the church. Shame still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled her. For the first time, she wondered if Ruth, in her proud rejection, had left behind not scraps but treasure. The wind shifted, carrying the faint howl of coyotes from the hills. Elias turned to her then, as if to speak, but stopped. His hand hovered near hers on the bench, close enough that the warmth of his skin brushed hers. He did not take her hand, but he left it there, an unfinished gesture, a promise not yet spoken. Clara's breath caught. The world around her held still, waiting, and in that suspended moment, she felt herself balanced on the edge of something vast, something that might yet claim her if she dared to let it.